Right, so then how do we know exactly what that third seal actually was? I've heard that it has something to do with possibly a Planet X or something along those lines, but how do we know?
Well, sure, there were certain people who were close to the actual real third secret who read it. Perhaps you're familiar with Father Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit who came out, blew the cover on this thing, and said, "I want nothing to do with it." He actually left Rome and came to the United States and started whistleblowing, right? And so he was on shows like Coast to Coast with Art Bell and all of these other figures to warn, not only the West here but the world of this third secret. And he couldn't say it verbatim because he was under oath, but he always would give you tidbits. And if you listened to his talks enough, you were able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But essentially, it breaks down to those who have read it. It breaks down to apostasy in the Catholic Church, the changes that were made at the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, which was basically a bridge. To put it in layman's terms, it's a bridge over into the New Age, right? We always hear this concept, the New Age or the New World Order. Well,
Right.
the New Age is this Luciferian one world religion, which is about to take place in Rome. And so the third secret, yeah, it's basically cut into two parts. It's apostasy in the Catholic Church, and secondarily, it is Planet X incoming. Now, she didn't actually mention Planet X verbatim, but you can surmise based upon what she is describing or relaying, millions of people dying on coastlines in a matter of minutes, and a lot of the apocalyptic things that we see in Revelation, and in also in just in the Gospel. I think it's Matthew 24, Luke 21. That she was warning the world, hey, listen, this thing is coming as a punishment for mankind, just over the overall morality and the way things are headed. So, yeah, there was people close to the third text that basically kind of leaked it out. Um,
And how are they allowed to keep it under wraps like this? And then how come there's no? I mean, I'm getting into the kind of the mystical part of it, but why hasn't God done something about that? Them lying to us and keeping it from us.
well, I think in part, I think in part, Michael, that people like myself, my former spiritual director, Father Paul Kramer. There was another priest, Father Gruner, who runs the Fatima Center, who was trying to blow the horn on this as well. I mean, there are people out there like us who are trying to come out more into the mainstream to talk about this. And it's not going to come from the mainstream. It's not going to come from the Vatican until after the fact. After all these things start happening, once the one world religion is formalized here soon in Rome, and it could very well happen over the next year or two, it's going to be fairly obvious to most. So in terms of what I would say, why the reason why God hasn't allowed it to break into the mainstream, I think it's a punishment. Honestly, I think it's a punishment for men turning their back, from our perspective, on on Catholic truth. A punishment for, I mean, just take a look at the overall morality now, with sodomy being shoved down our throats, abortion on the rise. It is a punishment for us, and ultimately, punishment in the end tries to reroute our hearts. There's always love at the end of that stick, much like, if you did something wrong, Michael, I would hope that your parents would try to correct you in loving fashion. And sometimes you can't be spared that rod of correction to kind of get your act together. Well, that's what God's doing. He's in these chastisements. He's going to be kind of giving us a little whack on the hiney, saying, "Hey, got to get your act together. I'm truth, and I don't change. So we have to adapt to truth, not us as man trying to make up a phony baloney religion at Vatican II and try to create this false unity, this new Tower of Babel, if you will." So I would,
Yeah. So okay, and there's several religions now. Do most of them say the same thing when it comes to this end time scenario, or is there differences there, or does it matter?
well, yeah, I can't necessarily speak for every religion. I don't claim to be an expert, in some of the other what we would call false religions, but I would say they probably have a somewhat similar timeline. I mean, to me, I think it's fairly clear that what the Blessed Virgin Mary was trying to say at Fatima was basically a replay of the apocalypse. And when Sister Lucia was actually asked by a certain bishop at a certain point, the bishop asked her, well, what is the third secret really all about? And she mentioned it was in the apocalypse, and specifically, I think 6 through 12. And so, you're going to see things that you probably wish you hadn't seen here very soon, and things are going to get just really bizarre. I kind of label it. We're going from diabolical disorientation, where I think there's a lot of confusion just in the Catholic Church and overall in general, to just straight out Twilight Zone. I mean, it's going to start getting bizarre here in the not too distant future when you see certain characters arrive on the scene.
Is this, would you say then that this is what's going on when mass deaths of different species, I don't know, earth changes that seem to be going on with weather patterns going absolutely off the wall and earthquake tremors? Would you connect all that to this Fatima?
Oh yeah, this is definitely what she was warning us about. Again, Father Malachi Martin, in some of his talks, basically said, "Hey, pay attention to the sky." I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but the Vatican has an observatory. There's an observatory over in Australia called Project Wormwood. Anyone who's studied Scripture knows Wormwood is in Revelations. It's that star or asteroid which crashes into the Earth, which in my opinion is going to be a comet. Planet X will eventually kick in a comet and will get hit by a rather large one, much like that movie. What's the name of that movie where the Deep Impact, kind of like that scenario. And that falls in line with Catholic prophecy, by the way. Saint Hildegard talks about this comet coming in.
I see.
But it very much ties in with Planet X. And by the way, if you want to know, God kind of does history kind of repeats itself. And we look back in the Old Testament, we see stories of how the Sodomites were buried and how they were, chastised. We noticed that there was fiery brimstone that fell from the skies, right? So here we have Planet X coming in, and most people who've studied Planet X will basically tell you the same thing, is that it's going to be kicking in a lot of these meteorites. So here we have history repeating itself. Pay attention to the skies. I think it was just a week ago, there was 150 recorded noticeable fireballs in the sky. So you're going to see these fiery meteorites coming into, crashing into the earth and smashing, just as it did in the Old Testament, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and I would agree with you. The fireballs, they seem to be plenty these days, as they have been now, I think, for the last few years. But now you'll get some who argue against that and say, oh, it's always been like that. It's just you got the internet now, so everybody finds out about more.
Yeah. I mean, you'll hear arguments like that, but yeah, I mean, well, even just since the scientific era, I did a blog, I think it was about a year ago, where they said even in 2014, overall, the meteorites have doubled. And I'm sure it's worse than that at this point. So, yeah, I mean, people are going to be in for a rude awakening when they start seeing these large, fiery meteorites smashing into the earth. And that's really not even the worst of it. As Planet X gets closer, obviously it's going to play with the sun. Now, the reason why Fatima is so important for your listeners, okay, basically she came to the world in 1917. She warned. She said, hey, get your act together, basically. God's not happy. She showed these three saintly Catholic children hell, which was the first vision, if you will. And the children were there for a matter of moments, and they wanted out. And they saw how most souls were going to hell. I'll say that again. The majority of souls go to hell. That would follow Catholic teaching, by the way. She also warned of the immodesty which is about to break in the world, and that she specifically mentioned that most souls go to hell due to sexual sins, or just sins of impurity, if you will. And then she also, of course, warned of World War II, which was coming. She also warned of the errors of Russia. Okay, so she literally, was warning about communism coming into play. And the key thing in all this was she said that Russia had to be converted to her Immaculate Heart, otherwise the world would suffer greatly. This hasn't been done, Michael, and we are on the verge of Russia about to slap around the world like no other. America will not be spared in what's about to happen. U.S. and NATO keep stepping on the toes of Russia, and I just did a report a few minutes ago where Russia, this actually came from InfoWars, Russia specifically is now prepping for World War III. Their people, I mean, they're stocking up on all kinds of goods and foods and stuff. They know it's about to happen. So, and when it goes off, it's going to be something else. But anyway, so with Fatima, okay, the key thing is that was in 1917. Well, there was a key prophecy in the Catholic Church. It was Pope Leo's vision in which the devil was granted 100 years to destroy the church. To put it in a nutshell, God granted this, and so many of us think that 2017 is a key date because that's going to be 100 years from Fatima. Now, in 1917, there was what was called the Miracle of the Sun, where literally about 100,000 Freemasons, non-Catholics, even atheists showed up, going there to almost to mock the Blessed Virgin Mary, and they saw the sun dance. It was the day the sun danced, and they literally thought that the sun was going to come down and destroy them all. And a lot of them converted to the Catholic Church at this point. So what I'm trying to say in a nutshell, I know we're going to have an hour here, is I think in 2017, as I was emailing you earlier, there will be a CME solar kill shot chastisement where the sun is going to play an intricate role in this again. Kind of like, 1917 was your warning. 2017 didn't get your act together. Now God is going to chastise the world. And much like that movie, The Knowing, with Nicolas Cage, you're going to see these CME, solar flares coming down and literally burning a third of the Earth.
So if we get the solar flare first, then the Planet X might not be such a bad thing after that, right? I mean, won't most people perish anyhow because a good majority of them wouldn't be prepared for it?
Yeah, it's the actual specific timing of all these events is, none of us knows, Michael. I mean, I don't certainly claim to be a prophet. I mean, I try to piece all of it together and have some kind of sequence, and I can give your listeners a more general sequence of events. Concerning this fire, though, on Good Friday, March, let's see, I think it was April 7th, 1950, the Blessed Virgin Mary spoke to another holy seer in Italy. And she said about this fire, she says, "See how Russia will burn. Before my eyes there are extended an immense field covered with flames and smoke in which souls were submerged in it as if in a sea of fire." Okay, so that very much is describing a CME. It's not World War III, which he's describing. She goes on to say, "All this fire," says the Blessed Virgin Mary, "is not that which will fall from the hands of man, but will be hurled directly from the angels at the time of this great chastisement. Therefore, we basically have to do prayers and penance." And this was reiterated, the same message, in 1973, so about 2 decades later, at Akita, Japan. She spoke to this very humble nun, in which she said, "If men don't repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment on all humanity. It will be a punishment greater than the flood, than the deluge back in Noah," he says, or she says, "such as will never have been seen before. Fire will fall from the sky and wipe out a greater part of humanity, the good as well as the bad, sparing neither priests nor the faithful." Now, for your non-Catholic audience, it's found in Scripture as well. I believe it's Revelations 8:7, where it talks about a fire being, hurled to the earth, mingled with blood, basically burning up a third of humanity. So, all these prophecies are found in Scripture, by the way. So, yeah, and that's not even the worst of it, in my opinion. The 3 days.
It gets worse than that.
Yeah, no, it really does. Or it'll at least be in conjunction with it. I think the CME chastisement will probably be a part of the 3 days of darkness. Now, this prophecy as well, I kind of get a chuckle when I go out into alternative media sites like Before It's News, and there's a lot of Christians who are taking this and really butchering this prophecy because it's a traditional Catholic prophecy. There was a 3 days of darkness in the Old Testament. Remember, it was part of the 10 plagues of Egypt. Remember the frogs and the locusts and all that good stuff, which we're seeing again, by the way. We're seeing hordes of frogs gathering in China. We've reported on the locusts are back now in Russia and the Middle East. Rivers turning blood red. We're seeing that happen all over again. So a lot of people think that was a previous pass, if you will, of Planet X, and I agree with them. I've had the Gil Broussards on, the Marshall Masters, the Steve Olson. I just had on John Moore, I'm not sure if you interviewed him yet, but he was like a high-ranking.
Yeah, I've spoke with John Moore, and I've spoke with Dr. Rand. I've spoke with Marshall Masters, Marshall Masters, I have no respect for him at all. But, I got nothing really bad to say about the other guys.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, keeping that side out of it, I mean, I don't try to get too, there's different schools of thought, within the whole Planet X community. I try not to get caught up in it. I try to pick people's brains
I hear you.
And see what correlates with what we teach as Catholics or what we can find in prophecy. But, yeah, John was just on this past week, and, we've both been saying this now for years. You better get off the coastlines. You better get out of major cities because, in my opinion, the end game has begun. And I did a blog on this, which kind of shows a more general timeline coming from Catholic prophecy of, where we're headed, because most of us who study Planet X know that the government knows about this. Let's be frank. I mean, they know where this thing is at. Both the Vatican and the world governments. That's the reason why they've been preparing, these underground bunkers for the past 50 plus years. I mean, they know where they're going, and they're going to leave us up here.
Sure, but I would think if it's going to get as bad as it's said, I mean, you got a Planet X or whatever it is coming through and causing that kind of destruction. I would think that they're going to get buried in their little closets underground, and I don't know how you plan for something like that. I mean, that's like people who go out in the ocean and think, I'm just going to jump in the waves, and they don't respect the undercurrent.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally agree with you, and that's actually one of the things the Blessed Virgin Mary said consistently throughout this revelation of what's called the 3 days of darkness. A lot of these holy Catholic seers, such as Marie Julie Geheny, she was one of them. Blessed Aiello essentially was another one that I just previously mentioned from Italy. But she said, listen, all the godless will perish. It doesn't matter where you are. You can go 2,000 feet under the earth. So it's a spiritual chastisement as well. If you're not in what's called a state of grace, you're going to die regardless. It doesn't matter if you're up, on Mars, wherever you are during this passing in this specific 3 days. You're going to die. It's kind of like an emulation of in the Old Testament. Remember where they had to mark the door, the outside of the doors with the lamb's blood, and then the angel of death came. You didn't have that, that sign on the outside of your door. You were dead. And it's kind of similar like that. So there's certain things that the Blessed Virgin Mary said you had to do, such as get blessed candles. If you don't have blessed candles from a traditional Catholic priest, there'll be no light in the world. No light. Not from the moon, not from the sun for those 3 days. You won't be able to flip on a lighter. No other candle will burn. And that's the punishment. I mean, it's very, very specific. So I agree. What I'm saying is I agree with you. Whether they get, the earth moves and they just get buried, or whether they're just down there and, God just takes them out in a spiritual manner, remains to be seen. But yeah, I mean, they're not going to escape, which is the climactic event, if you will, of the 3 days of darkness of Planet X's past.
I
And
see.
this was mentioned specifically by Father Martin too, by the way. He had a website called starharbor.com, and I managed to get some of his information because I knew they were going to take down that website. And so I put it over on another website that I started, Defeat Modernism, and I still have a direct quote from him that talks about all this. And specifically, he mentions in the third Secret of Fatima, it talks about the 3 days of darkness. And so it's everything what we have been taught, as Catholics prior to the Second Vatican Council that would transpire, and we're kind of seeing this unveil right before our eyes.
And so this 3 days of darkness, and even this the EMP and all that, or not EMP, but the solar flare. So will the one world religion come before or after that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm going to drop a bomb on you like I did on all these other shows. There's a lot of us right now who don't hold Francis as the true pope. Okay, how do I put this? In church history, there's what are called anti-popes, which are imposter popes. They're not the true popes. Anti meaning opposing the true, just like we say antichrist. Well, he's an imposter Christ, right? Well, what basically happened was, as egregious as Benedict XVI was in his teachings, he was basically forced out by this mafia. It was called the St. Gallian Mafia. It was a group of cardinals, mainly Freemasons, led by Cardinal Martini, who was a known Italian Freemason, and this other really horrible cardinal named Daniels. I mean, even supports like just really strange teachings. If I'm not mistaken, sodomy even. And he's a cardinal in the church, to give you, an idea of just how bad it is in the hierarchy. And so essentially they forced them out. They came out publicly and literally said, we forced them out. Now, per canon law in the church, that would make Benedict XVI's resignation invalid. If a pope is forced out under duress, that means his resignation is not accepted, basically. Even though, the world is pushing it like, oh yeah, he left because he was old. No, he didn't leave because he was old. It's not, listen, I'm sure you probably teach this too on your website. The mainstream media is just, it's like, it's a soap opera. It's like, sit down,
It's
grab your,
It's entertainment and mind control all in
Oh
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hilarious. I mean, I don't know how people gobble this stuff up. Look at the war on terror stuff, Michael. I mean, come on, really. I mean, does anyone really believe that all this stuff is not scripted, as if they hadn't planned out all these attacks, months ahead of time?
Well, and I think that a lot of it is scripted. Absolutely. Just like, these protests and all this stuff that goes on, I think that, these people, they're, a lot of them are paid to be out there and doing what they're doing. No doubt about that.
Yeah, Soros money,
Yeah.
obviously being
Yeah.
funded through that. And when you take a look, you just got to follow the money, really. But, if you want to get my take on that, I think Trump is just being used to stage revolution here in the West. That's actually the last imminent sign before the 3 days of darkness is revolution here in the West in terms of Catholic prophecy. You'll see Europe fold beforehand. You're already starting to see Europe fold. I mean, take a look at France and even Italy and in Germany. I mean, the Muslims are just, Islam's just running them over. And that whole, the whole refugee nonsense, I mean, all that's scripted too. I mean, the New World Order wants to break down borders. It wants to create this one world hodgepodge conglomerate of people. And, break down nationalism, break down patriotism. I mean, they want to smash us down to fit us into this New World Order. And again, this is everything the Catholic Church and even popes before the Second Vatican Council warned of. And
Yeah.
it's just so sad to see how so many people who label themselves Catholic are following these popes who literally support the New World Order.
And I've got a colleague, well, he does a show on this network, Peter Kling, and he says that his take is that the Pope is a Jesuit and that, just like you said, that, there's been a takeover.
Oh yeah, well, there's no doubt the Jesuits are highly infected, in my opinion. Due to what we call modernism. It's another heresy, and basically the best way I could describe it is it's an erroneous flavor of Catholicism. So instead of saying Catholicism with a C, since the Second Vatican Council we use a K, Catholicism. It's a ripoff. It's like it's like going to the store and you want to buy Nikes and you end up buying Ikes. Is it really a Nike? No. Well, are they saying it's Catholic? Yeah. Is it really in reality? No, it's not. It's modernism. It's this twisted version of what they think is Catholic. And so, yeah, the Jesuits are the most infected. They're highly New Age. They're the ones who are supporting sodomy. But the worst of it hasn't come yet. There's a lot of people who think Francis is the false prophet, and that's not true. I mean, I see a lot of, I think it's, like Protestants like Tom Horn, and, I even had Leo Zagami on the other day. He's not the false prophet. There's someone coming after him who is directly involved with the New Age. His name's going to be Yeshua ben Joseph. Now, he's going to be your character who in the Bible is called the false prophet. He's going to be the Robin to the Batman of the big guy, the Antichrist, whose name is Maitreya. Okay, Lord Maitreya. He's the New Age Antichrist, which the UN and Israel are going to purport as the savior of the world. So people have to sit back and realize they're being set up.
Well, now, if this happens, I mean, if they do put this guy, say, hey, here's your savior, I mean, wouldn't people? I mean, I would certainly would. A light would go on in my head if I seen this happening before my eyes. I mean, wouldn't? Don't you think? Or do you think most people would miss it?
Well, I'm not sure if it's about missing it. At that point, I think most people will be dead. All in all, through all these chastisements, you're looking at 2/3 to 3/4 of the world not here to begin with. And I mean, you probably studied this and tell your people too. Global depopulation. I mean, what do the New World Order people want? They want what, 90% of the world gone. So that kind of falls in line with Catholic prophecy that suggests about 3/4 of the world aren't going to be here. I don't think it's necessarily about missing it as opposed to this. Right now, we're sitting pretty comfortably. Probably you and I, Michael. We got air conditioning. We got this or that. When everything starts to unravel, when the economic collapse occurs, which, by the way, may happen before the elections. I've had top economists on my own radio show, the Andy Hoffman's the Gorilla, economic expert. I've had Gerald Salente. I've had them all on. They're all saying by the end of 2016, many of them before the elections, the economic collapse happens. You're seeing all these riots and revolutions. What's the latest thing? The race war card. I mean, they've had this one in the works now for a while. They want to divide and conquer us. They want us to be so chaotic that we have to look towards a figure to say, we need help. You see what I'm saying? So think about how bad it has to be for people who have their heads squared on straight now for them to succumb to someone like this guy. You see what I'm saying? They probably won't be eating.
Well, yeah, and this is what the mainstream media does: is they put the cameras on. It's like they get groups like Black Lives Matter, and they say, "All right, 3, 2, 1, action! Cameras on," and then they make it look a hell of a lot worse than it is.
Yeah, that's it. It's
Yeah.
all propaganda. Get your popcorn out and just see what the next. Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe, and there will be, and I've had some other, insiders on the show who say that there will be major false flags such as 9/11. Not that nothing happened there. I mean, I think we all agree that something.
Well,
happened.
yeah, and I want to make it clear. It's not that I believe that everybody's actors or anything. I mean, all it takes is you could send 3 paid shills out to start problems, and they could get plenty to follow them because there's enough dummies out there who would. So, so they know what they're doing.
So, in order to drag us into a really severe war, obviously the worst war of them all, World War III, which Albert Pike said in his, famous Luciferian 33rd degree Freemason, which, by the way, I think Francis is. We go back to Francis real quick. I think he's a 33rd degree Freemason, so that very much would make him a Luciferian in the end. And I'm not afraid at all to say that in front of other Catholics. He gives the hand signs of a Freemason, all these hidden hand Masonic hand signs, the Baphomet hand sign, the 666 sign of man hand sign. All the politicians are doing it. Even Trump's doing it. They're all in on it, folks. I mean, it's just, just sit back, and all I can tell you is just start preparing your soul because everything's going to start really falling apart. But to get back to my false flag point, I think there's going to be not only one major false flag, but a series of major false flags, probably like chemical attacks by quote-unquote ISIS or something, to that which will drag us into war. I mean, people, in order for us to get, the large majority of Americans to say, hey, we need to go to war, I mean, there has to be some really catastrophic events. We saw how we reacted after Boston, right? How we immediately said we need to go after Islam, we need to do this. Well, that's how they'll drag us into this Third World War, and it will be along the same lines, but it has to be something just terribly awful to where, I mean, a lot of people are going to die.
Well, I've seen more after Boston's where they wanted to go after certain leaders and, overthrow this one, that one, and, they say it's not a war, we're just performing an operation over there, and so a lot of lies, a lot of deception. Absolutely. We got a question from one of the listeners. JH says, does this man know anything about a false alien invasion this year?
Yeah, that's a key piece to this. I've been following this now for a few years. The alien card, I kind of call it the alien card, which is kind of scary. Hillary Clinton said if she comes out and gets elected, she's going to disclose that aliens are real. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you're being set up. Everything is demonic. What is being purported as aliens certainly aren't. We know that our governments and the governments of the world, they have technology which are 50 plus years in advance ahead of ours. Having said that, what they're going to do is once they do this disclosure, whether it's this year, could very well be this year, maybe in 2017. But and by the way, this ties in with Maitreya, that character I told you about. He's very much related to these UFOs. A lot of UFO stuff on his page, shareinternational.org, that you can look up and study for yourself. But anyway, what point will they do it? Maybe this year. But what they're going to say is when they come out with the aliens, they're going to say, hey, listen, look at all these fundamentalist Christians. You see, they got the Bible all wrong, and they're going to go ahead and evolve people even more into the New Age religion, if that makes sense. So there'll be like a very clear line with the whole alien false flag, if you will, that will separate people going into the New Age, following this Luciferian New Age religion, and those who just say, hey, no, this is nonsense, obviously. And yeah, Project Bluebeam, I'm sure a lot of your listeners and yourself have heard of Project Bluebeam, where they got these holographic images.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, they're doing that now with the Blessed Virgin Mary and Jesus even. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but just down in Africa within the past few years, there's a YouTube video that went viral, and I had someone send it to me, and, supposedly the Blessed Virgin Mary was seen on the sun, and so I said, okay, put that aside. Let me see what she's saying, because that's how I know whether it's false or not. And I go and I read this stuff, and it's all one world religion stuff. I said, this is not the Blessed Virgin Mary talking. This is Project Bluebeam. They creating these, crosses in the sky, and that's exactly how they're going to pull off this false alien card is with Project Bluebeam. And they got very sophisticated technology to pull
Well,
that.
well, now how will people know for sure if it's a false aliens or if real aliens show up? Because I don't believe that we're alone. I think that there's something out there. What if they really come?
Well, see, I would disagree. I don't believe that there are aliens. I believe that, well, during the 3 days of darkness, let me put it to you this way. The gates of hell are going to be opened. One of the reasons why the Blessed Virgin Mary said you need to be inside, and by the way, the 3 days of darkness is going to happen on a Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday on a certain Catholic feast day. I'm going to give you a heads up. I think it's in April. It very well could be this April, because I'm trying to build up to a point here where I think they're going to have this unveiling of Planet X this December. I'll give you a general timeline here in a second. Now, Blessed Virgin Mary said you got to stay in. You got to put covers over all your windows. You can't even look outside. If you look outside, you'll die on the spot, she said. It's going to be that horrific. Okay, so what's going to happen? All of hell is going to be released. I'm sure you've heard about CERN, where they're trying to open up these wormholes and
We have, as a matter of fact, we were supposed to talk about that later in the show with my next guest, actually, CERN. He thinks that's got to do with the Mandela effect.
Well, this is going to be tied in with the 3 days of darkness. This is what's going to happen. That they will eventually open up the gates of hell, so to speak. Every devil will be let loose. The Blessed Virgin Mary says, if you're caught outside, you're done. You're dead. In terms of the Nephilim, now maybe that's that's kind of a more taboo subject. I would say I'm open to it. We obviously know there's giants in the Old Testament. I actually kind of lean towards these things coming back with demons. How tall they are, whatever they kind of look like. I don't think it really matters at this point. You just need to be inside. But from the New Age, they call their specific type that these ascended masters. These people who are just so far advanced than us that we have to follow them. And this is the deception that a lot of people will fall for at that point, because again, many people will be so desolate and in such despair, they'll just say, okay, yep, give me the mark of the beast. And if you want to, I could cover what that mark of the beast is here in a second, because many people get that wrong, actually.
Oh, sure. I would love to hear it.
Okay, so again, referencing Catholic tradition, we always have to go back to what the early church fathers said on these end times, because they were the ones around Christ. Remember, not from a Catholic perspective, not everything was written down in the Bible that Jesus said. So we have oral and written tradition of these early apostles. Okay, and so some of them talked about this topic, the mark of the beast. Now, the mark of the beast is actually a reference to a counterfeit baptism of the New Age. So the general sequence of events for me that I've been telling people is Francis isn't the true pope. He's an anti-pope. Pope Benedict XVI is your true Catholic pope, who's the Pope of Fatima. One of the things that the Blessed Virgin Mary basically said is that a pope would flee Rome and he eventually would be killed. I know we only have a short time here, but essentially he's going to take off with some conservative cardinals, and he's going to basically take the Catholic Church with him. What I'm telling you is the church is not going to be in Rome anymore, technically speaking. It's going to take off, and it's going to move through Europe. I think it's going to end up in Fatima, Portugal, which is very vital to what we're talking about. Fatima, right. That's what she showed in 1917. So that's where actually the head of the Catholic Church will end up. So we have this split, a schism, we call it. And so the New Age religion is going to be planted under this false prophet after anti-Pope Francis takes off. And by the way, I talked with Leo Zagami about this. He's not Catholic either, but it kind of ties in with some of the insider information that I've gotten from a former spiritual director of mine, that once you see Francis take off for Argentina, which is scheduled for early 2017, he seemingly is going to stay there and just plant himself there. And then this is when all hell is going to break loose in Europe. I mean, there's going to be the economic crash. There's going to be Islam marching through. You'll see Russia marching through. I mean, it's going to just be like WWE Royal Rumble in Europe. And then you're going to see this character show up, surprisingly out of nowhere. Right? This is going to be your false prophet. And he's going to say, I have all the answers. What we need to do is this. What they're going to do is they're going to abolish the Catholic sacraments. The Catholic Church has, the sacraments, baptism, confirmation, marriage, all of that. They're going to abolish that. They're going to get rid of it, and they're going to implant this 5-step self-realization program. So it's very New Age, to reach your higher consciousness, kind of like Avatar-ish. All this propaganda leading up to the New Age. And one of which is just frightening, The second part of that 5-step process is this counterfeit baptism. So forget about the whole chipping thing, because you're not even going to get that chip if you first don't sign on the dotted line, so to speak, and get this counterfeit baptism, this seal, which will be on your forehead more than likely, to mark you and identify you that you're with this character, that you're with Yeshua ben Joseph and the Antichrist, in my opinion, whose name is Maitreya. See, you kind of follow me? It's going to be, the camps are going to be split, and it's going to be so apparent. It should be apparent. I mean, to you and I, again, whether our friends and neighbors, whether they just succumb and say, hey, listen, I got to eat, I got to feed my family, I'm just signing on the dotted line with these freaks, that remains to be seen. Of course, you're going to lose your soul, Scripture says.
I've got a listener here with a question. He says, Michael, our Christian Orthodox Bible says that God filled the universe with life, not Earth, but the universe. What does your guest think about that, he says?
Well, you're going to get different opinions from different theologians. I just had on Dr. Sungenis, who's a very popular traditional Catholic apologist, and he suggests, and he quotes one council, that the church has infallibly condemned that there is no life outside of this universe. I would say the most recent plausible catechism in the church has left it an open question, if you will. So I would say at this point, I technically speaking don't consider myself, an apologist, a professional apologist. I don't have any formal degrees. I mean, I do an awful lot of research to where I could hold my own with these individuals. But I would say it's more of an open question. All I'm telling you is that specifically what we're talking about right here is not aliens. It's not going to be aliens. It's going to be a staged event. Mm-hmm. And then with the 3 days of darkness specifically, it's completely demonic. I mean, the gates of hell are going to open up. So it's interdimensional. It's not interplanetary, if that makes sense.
Now these gates of hell, what exactly? I mean, are we talking about a literal dimension that is hell, or what is this?
Yeah, Father Martin talked about this on Coast to Coast. He said you're going to see the veil, the lifting of the veil, so to speak. I mean, if we were to go outside right now, and we would have that special ability to see into that world, if you will, you would see a whole lot of demons walking around, a whole lot of devils. And that's probably, that could be what is being passed off as these, flying ships or whatever. I mean, I think most of them are just, this alien technology that they have, which is far advanced. But I would be open to the possibility of it just being flat out demons, which I think even was what Leo Zagami was trying to say too. Because I mean, we're on the same page that we both don't agree that it's aliens as such. I mean, it's definitely, they're beefing up the propaganda. They've been doing it now for 50 plus years with the ET movies, with the Independence Days and all this stuff. I mean, they're building up that propaganda to a point where when they stage this Project Blue Beam Effect, I think a lot of people are going to fall for it. Now you're going to ask, well, why are they doing that? Well, I'm glad you asked, Michael. Okay, here's the point. They've got numerous avenues or way to unite the one world religion. What's one way? The war on terror. How can we bring humanity closer? How can Catholics hug their Buddhist brothers? And I'm saying that facetiously because as Catholics, of course, we don't hold that there is salvation outside of the church. But that's what you're seeing now from the Vatican, right? This one world religion, pagans are good, atheists are even good. Hey, everyone gets a cut of their pie. Well, you can do that with the war on terror. You build up enough paranoia, hey, everyone's got to come together in John Lennon fashion.
Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, with all due respect, now there is a side that would say that they do the same thing with most religions, is that they cast fear, and that's what some of the listeners will message me. I don't want to give you, read it all, but some would say that, right? I mean, so they kind of use religion too in the same sense, and these are the religions you say are taking over then.
No, are you talking about the fear of God?
Well, the fear of burning in hell if you don't do this or do that.
Well, yeah, there should be a fear there. I mean, I would agree with them then. Okay. I mean, if God is who he says he is and we reject that, then there should be a fear that I would suffer eternal damnation. I mean, that's why we have a thing called faith. I mean, those in the end who have faith in Christ and follow the church that he established get sent onto his right side, and those who don't get separated the sheep from the goats. That's what it is. It's really faith in the end that separates us.
It
So,
is. I agree there. It is.
so it's all what you believe in. Just like, an example going into these times ahead, it's going to be what you believe in. If you believe in man, you're going to fall. If you believe in, and just from our perspective, you believe in this religion or that religion, you're going to see how it's not going to pan out. And that's one of the things we preach at Trad Cat Night is faith and hope, having the wings of an eagle, spreading it in faith and hope, because that's all that's going to survive during these times. Everything's going to be taken from you. The socialists are going to come for your home. They're going to come for your kids. The economic collapse is going to happen. You're going to be left on an island like, what was that guy's name? Tom Hanks in that movie where he's talking to the volleyball head. That's what it's going to feel like. You see what I'm saying? Everything's going to be stripped from us, and we're going to get reacquainted with God in that sense. So in a certain sense, as I mentioned before, it's going to be a good thing. What was I was trying to come to a point. Well, with the general sequence of events, I know we're getting more short on time. I wanted to let your listeners hear this. We're in the end game has begun, according to my perspective. We have the riots beginning now, race war. You're going to see an economic collapse here probably before the elections, if not by the end of 2016. Ultimately, revolution, right? Because we know after the economic collapse goes, people can't eat. Gas prices go up to whatever it'll be, $20, $30, a gallon. Wars breaking out. I mean, it's going to be really nasty. False flags. Obviously, World War III, which is another card. Remember, they've got different avenues to unite this one world religion. War on Terror is one. World War III. I mean, if you can build up enough fear and paranoia that we're about to duke each other, don't you think a lot of people would just say, yeah, I'll accept this new religion. Catholics are as good as communists. Catholics are as good
I don't know. Nowadays, you tell them that, they might say, well, I might as well go kick in windows and steal TVs. I'm going anyways.
Well, some people will, yeah. But ultimately, I think, there's going to be a good number of people who fall for this, eventual new religion. And then the other way, by the way, is the alien card. It's to unite humanity. With this whole alien card, we got to come together and fight the aliens and all this stuff. I'm sure they'll pitch that. I think people will fall for it.
Okay.
And then ultimately, as I mentioned, as Planet X is passing, it's kind of the climactic event to it all, in which basically all the godless and those not in the state of grace won't be around to live to see the day. And it may. What I'm saying is they know Planet X is coming, and most Planet X researchers who study this know they've got about a 3 to 6 month window beforehand to get martial law, global martial law into play. And what I'm saying is, you're seeing these riots and race wars pick up really quickly and all these false flags. We're building up to that point, I think, to where the unveiling of Planet X could be this December. Now, the reason why that's key, Michael, is this. The New Age teaches this. Now, from a Christian standpoint, the three magi followed the star, right? Remember how they followed the star to Christ?
Right.
They eventually followed Bethlehem. Well, guess what they're going to point to in the sky? And they're going to say, oh, look, the Messiah is here. You see what I'm saying? After all these chastisements start, he's here to save us, and that's what they're going to pitch. And by the way, after my long research, it's going to be the last week in December in mockery, counterfeit of what we know truly transpired. So, and by the way, the New Age religion is going to abolish Christmas. That's one of the things they're going to abolish, because there'll be no need for Christmas once Maitreya is here. He's here and present among us.
Now, what will be in the last week of December now?
That is where I believe they're going to pitch Planet X all over the media. Now, it could be.
Okay.
I've been on record now for a couple of years saying 2016 was a pretty key date, because remember, 100-year anniversary of Fatima is coming up, and that's very key to us.
All right. And Jim asked, he's a listener, and he asked, why would demons need a ship, he asked.
Why would demons need a ship? Is that what...
Yeah, that's the question. Like if they were...
Well, I'm not even suggesting that they are in a ship.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying that some of what you're seeing in the sky are ships, but they're not demons. I mean, it's just technology.
Oh, okay.
It's our technology. Now, are some of those things that we're seeing up there that are, buzzing, from this point to that point? I mean, are they actually in a ship, or is that real demon? I don't know. I mean, all I can tell you, it's not, from my perspective, interplanetary. It's just not. Not that, again, I'm saying that aliens, are infallible. People who believe in aliens are like outside the church or something like that. I don't say that. I'm just saying that what's happening right now is not aliens as people are pitching it. Interplanetary, these people are coming here to help us and save us. Because guess what? That's what the New Age is going to say. I mean, that's what Maitreya is saying. You see what I'm saying? So it's people are being set up for that card to where they're going to show up on the scene. They're going to have all the answers, these ascended masters, and people are going to fall down and basically worship these freaks because they have all the resources. I mean, I'm sure you're probably aware of even the geoengineering aspect, how they have HARP and Scalar, and they could, they can manipulate weather and stuff. Think about this. In areas which have famines or something, if you don't have water, now you can go to this supposed Messiah, and he says, well, I can get you water by tomorrow. Just fall down and worship me. Well, how is he going to do that? We know they have technology to do that. They can just they can just make some clouds over there. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's control and manipulation, and people don't understand that. They don't understand how these freaks have all the resources. They control the mainstream media, and everything is being set up for this end game. We truly are in the last hour, and so a whole lot has to happen in a very short period of time, and we're seeing that.
I was going to say, I think a whole lot is happening in a short period of time. And Eric, what I'd like to do is give you the floor to get out anything that you'd like. And in the future, if you'd like to come back for a full show, I'd be more than happy to do so. And I think I will take this segment and I will put it on YouTube this week. So we'll get it on.
Yeah, I'm glad that you do, Michael. Like I said, it's just a lot going on. The bottom line in all this, I know we're covering a lot in a short period of time. You can get to tradcatnight.blogspot.com. A lot of information. Again, I bring on a lot of non-Catholic guests who are privy in their own area. We've had ex-presidential nominees like Merlin Miller on, the John Moores of the world. We have a lot of prominent individuals coming on giving their take on things. You can also find me on YouTube, by the way, Trad Cat Night, over 900 videos. Catholic prophecy. I have the most comprehensive video on the 3 days of darkness. It's 30 minutes long, and it covers everything that Scripture says about it, that these Catholic mystics say about it. But the bottom line is this and all this. I mean, God's just looking for for us to get corrected. God's not evil in that sense, but we have to get our house in order, so to speak. And so that's really what the Blessed Virgin Mary was saying, at Fatima, is that, repentance, conversion, start making sacrifices. Because, when poop hits the fan here, Michael, there's going to be really two avenues. Are we going to be the types who are sitting around with the guns and trying to blow people's heads off? Like, hey, stay away from my Wheaties. Or are we going to sit down and try to figure this thing out? Like with the direction, being under the direction of Christ and the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, saying, hey, listen, I got a box of Wheaties. Let's figure this out together. You see what I'm saying? Like, we're going to have to come together and not be irrational, like the law of the jungle. I mean, we're going to have to try to figure this out together, because it's going to be, it's just going to be beyond our wildest dreams with everything happening at once. I have no doubt that most people are going to think this is the end of the world, but it's not from our perspective. I failed to mention this. There's a shorter period of peace, which is called the Triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Once this consecration is done by Russia, by the way, Russia converts to the Catholic Church. The Orthodox will convert to the Catholic Church, and then it's going to be lights out to Islam. Because it's going to seem like at a certain point, Islam's just going to run us over. Europe, and even here in the United States, you're starting to see the kind of early stages of that. So in the end, basically, she gives a message of reassurance and hope. Hey, listen, everything's going to work out, at least for a shorter period, probably about a generation. So I know there'll probably be people who ask it, do I think it's the end of the world? I don't quite think so. I think we're going to be able to push things back a little bit to where it's not necessarily the end of the world. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, I apologize. I couldn't do a full show tonight. Just got a lot going on tonight, but
Oh, that's quite all right. Next time we have you on, we'll save the last hour for calls and questions from listeners, because they definitely get engaged in this type of thing. And you've got people who agree and people who disagree, so it's fun to hear from everybody.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And that's we try to just put our information out there, get on these certain issues. We can't hold that they're infallible. I certainly don't go on a witch hunt for people who think there are aliens. I have people in my own family who think that. Okay, well, then you have a right to believe that. I mean, there's certain things as Catholics we have to doctrinally fall, otherwise we cease to be Catholics. But certainly, on the issue of aliens, that's not one of them, from my perspective, at least from what I studied. So, um, what was I going to say? So, look for December to be that key date of when they'll unveil Planet X. If it is, I just want to make this comment. If it is this December, you'll see the 3 Days of Darkness by April. If the mainstream pitches it and they say, oh, the star sign is here. By the way, the star sign to them is Venus. Venus is another name for Lucifer. It's another way of marking in the Luciferian New Age. So that's when you're really going to see all hell break loose. If you think this first 6 months of 2016 was bad, just wait till how the rest of this year plays out, because things are only going to snowball from here. So, yeah, if you have any questions, you can get me at apostleofmary@hotmail.com, and I'll try to answer all your questions as well.
All right.
To be kind of giving us a little whack on the hiney, saying, "Hey, got to get your act together." I'm truth, and I don't change. So we have to adapt to truth, not us as man trying to make up a phony baloney religion at Vatican II and try to create this false unity, this new Tower of Babel, if you will. So I would.
Yeah. So okay, and there's several religions now. Do most of them say the same thing when it comes to this end time scenario, or is there differences there, or does it matter?
Well, yeah, I can't necessarily speak for every religion. I don't claim to be an expert, in some of the other what we would call false religions, but I would say they probably have a somewhat similar timeline. I mean, to me, I think it's fairly clear that what the Blessed Virgin Mary was trying to say at Fatima was basically a replay of the apocalypse. And when Sister Lucia was actually asked by a certain bishop at a certain point, the bishop asked her, well, what is the third secret really all about? And she mentioned it was in the apocalypse, and specifically, I think 6 through 12. And so, you're going to see things that you probably wish you hadn't seen here very soon, and things are going to get just really bizarre. I kind of label it, we're going from diabolical disorientation, where I think there's a lot of confusion just in the Catholic Church and overall in general, to just straight out Twilight Zone. I mean, it's going to start getting bizarre here in the not too distant future when you see certain characters arrive on the scene.
Would you say then that this is what's going on when mass deaths of different species, I don't know, earth changes that seem to be going on, with weather patterns going absolutely off the wall and earthquake tremors? Would you connect all that to this Fatima? Right, so then, how do we know exactly what that third seal actually was? I've heard that it has something to do with possibly a Planet X or something along those lines, but how do we know?
Well, sure, there were certain people who were close to the actual real third secret who read it. Perhaps you're familiar with Father Malachi Martin, who was a Jesuit who came out, blew the cover on this thing, and said, "I want nothing to do with it." He actually left Rome and came to the United States and started whistleblowing, right? And so he was on shows like Coast to Coast with Art Bell and all of these other figures to warn, not only the West here but the world of this third secret. And he couldn't say it verbatim because he was under oath, but he always would give you tidbits. And if you listened to his talks enough, you were able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But essentially, it breaks down to those who have read it. It breaks down to apostasy in the Catholic Church, the changes that were made at the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, which was basically a bridge. To put it in layman's terms, it's a bridge over into the New Age, right? We always hear this concept, the New Age or the New World Order. Well, right. The New Age is this Luciferian one world religion, which is about to take place in Rome. And so the third secret, yeah, it's basically cut into two parts. It's apostasy in the Catholic Church, and secondarily, it is Planet X incoming. Now, she didn't actually mention Planet X verbatim, but you can surmise based upon what she is describing or relaying, millions of people dying on coastlines in a matter of minutes, and a lot of the apocalyptic things that we see in Revelation, and in also in just in the Gospel. I think it's Matthew 24, Luke 21, that she was warning the world, hey, listen, this thing is coming as a punishment for mankind, just over the overall morality and the way things are headed. So, yeah, there was people close to the third text that basically kind of leaked it out.
And how are they allowed to keep it under wraps like this? And how come there's no? I mean, I'm getting into the kind of the mystical part of it, but why hasn't God done something about that? Them lying to us and keeping it from us.
Well, I think in part, I think in part, Michael, that people like myself, my former spiritual director, Father Paul Kramer. There was another priest, Father Gruner, who runs the Fatima Center, who was trying to blow the horn on this as well. I mean, there are people out there like us who are trying to come out more into the mainstream to talk about this. And it's not going to come from the mainstream. It's not going to come from the Vatican until after the fact. After all these things start happening, once the one world religion is formalized here soon in Rome, and it could very well happen over the next year or two, it's going to be fairly obvious to most. So in terms of what I would say, the reason why God hasn't allowed it to break into the mainstream, I think it's a punishment. Honestly, I think it's a punishment for men turning their back, from our perspective, on Catholic truth. A punishment for, I mean, just take a look at the overall morality now, with sodomy being shoved down our throats, abortion on the rise. It is a punishment for us, and ultimately, punishment in the end tries to reroute our hearts. There's always love at the end of that stick, much like, if you did something wrong, Michael, I would hope that your parents would try to correct you in loving fashion, and sometimes you can't be spared that rod of correction to kind of get your act together. Well, that's what God's doing. He's in these chastisements, he's going, oh yeah, this is definitely what she was warning us about. Again, Father Malachi Martin, in some of his talks, basically said, hey, pay attention to the sky. I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but the Vatican has an observatory. There's an observatory over in Australia called Project Wormwood. Anyone who's studied scripture knows Wormwood is in Revelations. It's that star asteroid which crashes into the Earth, which in my opinion is going to be a comet. Planet X will eventually kick in a comet and will get hit by a rather large one, much like that movie. What's the name of that movie where the Deep Impact, kind of like that scenario. And that falls in line with Catholic prophecy, by the way. St. Hildegard talks about this comet coming in. But it very much ties in with Planet X. And by the way, if you want to know, God kind of does history kind of repeats itself. And we look back in the Old Testament, we see stories of how the Sodomites were buried and how they were, chastised. We noticed that there was fiery brimstone that fell from the skies, right? So here we have Planet X coming in, and most people who've studied Planet X will basically tell you the same thing, is that it's going to be kicking in a lot of these meteorites. So here we have history repeating itself. Pay attention to the skies. I think it was just a week ago, there was 150 recorded noticeable fireballs in the sky. So you're going to see these fiery, meteorites coming into, crashing into the earth and smashing, just as it did in the Old Testament, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and I would agree with you. The fireballs, they seem to be plenty these days, as they have been now, I think, for the last few years. But now you'll get some who argue against that and say, oh, it's always been like that. It's just you got the internet now, so everybody finds out about more.
Yeah. I mean, you'll hear arguments like that, but yeah, I mean, well, even just since the scientific era, I did a blog, I think it was about a year ago, where they said even in 2014, overall, the meteorites have doubled. And I'm sure it's worse than that at this point. So, yeah, I mean, people are going to be in for a rude awakening when they start seeing these large, fiery meteorites smashing into the earth. And that's really not even the worst of it. As Planet X gets closer, obviously it's going to play with the sun. Now, the reason why Fatima is so important for your listeners, okay, basically she came to the world in 1917. She warned. She said, hey, get your act together, basically. God's not happy. She showed these three saintly Catholic children hell, which was the first vision, if you will. and the children were there for a matter of moments, and they wanted out, and they saw how most souls were going to hell. I'll say that again: the majority of souls go to hell. That would follow Catholic teaching, by the way. She also warned of the immodesty which is about to break in the world, and that she specifically mentioned that most souls go to hell due to sexual sins, or just sins of impurity, if you will. And then she also, of course, warned of World War II, which was coming. She also warned of the errors of Russia. Okay, so she literally, was warning about communism coming into play. And the key thing in all this was she said that Russia had to be converted to her Immaculate Heart, otherwise the world would suffer greatly. This hasn't been done, Michael, and we are on the verge of Russia about to slap around the world like no other. America will not be spared in what's about to happen. U.S. and NATO keep stepping on the toes of Russia, and I just did a report a few minutes ago where Russia, this actually came from InfoWars, Russia specifically is now prepping for World War III. Their people, I mean, they're stocking up on all kinds of goods and foods and stuff. They know it's about to happen. So, and when it goes off, it's going to be something else. But anyway, so with Fatima, okay, the key thing is that was in 1917.